The Audi e-tron S is ridiculous in more ways than one, other than this somewhat outlandish colour that we have. Now, prices start from roughly £88,000 in the UK, and of course without options. You do also have some other e-trons on market, such as the e-tron S Sportback, the regular e-tron Sportback, and then also the original e-tron. Now, the latter can be found for roughly £62,000, and the model that we previously reviewed on the channel was the 55 Quattro, which is somewhat comparable to what we have over here, and prices start from around £72,000, again without options. If you want a detailed breakdown between the different trim levels and what is on offer, do check out our written review, which will be down in the description below or indeed in the pinned comments. So what does that extra wad of cash actually get you? Well, there's a secondary motor planted on the rear axle, and when combined with the front motor, it means you've got a tri-motor configuration. Now, with its 95 kilowatt hour battery pack, it outputs a whopping 370 kilowatts of power. That equates to 496 horsepower and gets you 973 newton meters of torque when you have it in its overboost function. Frankly, it's absolutely exhilarating, and we had it tested from 0 to 60 miles an hour in 4.04 seconds. So yes, looks from the exterior can be deceiving because this is a relatively chunky SUV, and yet when you put your foot down, well, you're certainly going to feel it. Now, just to put things into perspective, the regular Audi e-tron 55 Quattro has 300 kilowatts of power, and we had it tested at 0 to 60 at roughly 5.5 seconds. So you can see that increase of power is certainly noticeable, and that extra motor does do its work. Now, as for top speed, it's limited to 130 miles an hour, which is slightly disheartening for those people who are going to live on unrestricted roads, namely the German crowd on the Autobahn, but for most consumers like us in the UK, it will certainly suffice. Now, aside from its raw straight line speed, what about when it comes to its handling characteristics? Well, here it should be no surprise to learn that the e-tron S does suffer from a little bit of body roll. It's not gigantic and is definitely better than some cheaper alternatives, but it's no competition to the likes of the BMW iX, the BMW iX3, the Jaguar I-Pace, or for example, the likes of the smaller Audi Q4 e-tron, all of which just feel a little bit better planted on the road. As for the driver's feel, even in its sport mode preset, the e-tron S just doesn't give you that same sort of level of connection as the likes of the BMW or Jaguar alternatives. However, it does make up for it with its all-wheel drive configuration, whereas some of its competitors offer a front or rear-wheel drive configuration only, and therefore gives you plenty of confidence if you're going on trickier terrain. Now, this does bring us on to the four-corner air suspension, which is an absolute work of art. See here, if you're pottering in and around town, it's going to be soaking up anomalies, speed bumps or potholes with absolute ease. And better still, given the name suggests, it can also be adjusted on the fly. So for example, if you're going off-roading, you can set it on an off-road mode, and therefore it really raises the e-tron S's profile, preventing you from actually damaging the skirtings of the vehicle. Now, if you were to go at faster speeds, the suspension will drop automatically, and of course if you go on one of the dynamic presets, it's going to do that as well. Ultimately, what we're trying to say over here is that Audi provides one of the best suspension systems that's available in an electric SUV, but the German automaker actually goes that one step further by providing one of the best in-cabin experiences. And no, we're not referencing the plush interior, which we'll touch upon very shortly, but rather the quiet and serene interior. And by this, it's thanks to the acoustic glazing that's found on the windscreen and the dampening material around the cabin. The combination makes it one of the quietest that we've tested, and if you want some more information about this and you're fascinated about it, do check out our dedicated audio review that can be found down in the description below or indeed in the pinned comments. Now, while it's all very positive so far, what does let it down is its electric range. Now, despite it housing a 95 kilowatt hour gross or 86 kilowatt hour net battery pack, the vehicle attained 190 to 210 miles in our mixed driving test, and considering the weather is good, you might expect a little bit of a lower figure if it was in a winter climate. Frankly, here it's very similar to the regular Audi e-tron, and therefore that extra motor actually doesn't impact range all that much. However, given that the price that you're paying, you might have expected better range optimization, and see, in comparison to its rivals, for example the Jaguar I-Pace, the Audi Q4 e-tron, the Mercedes offerings, or for example ones from Volvo or Tesla, all of which will give you better range and therefore gives less range anxiety when you're going on longer excursions. Worse still, the Audi e-tron S also has very light regenerative braking. Yes, you do attain some energy back when you put your foot down on the physical brake pedal, but if we were to lift off the accelerator pedal, we'd expect even harsher deceleration than it currently offers. And this can only be customized via the flappy paddles which are found by the steering wheel, or for you to select an auto mode, which frankly uses GPS data and in our tested environment just didn't work all that well when we're just lifting off the accelerator pedal. It would have been great here if Audi provided a true one pedal driving like you'd find on a Volvo or Tesla, because then it would have made inner city commutes like we're doing now far less cumbersome. Now, if you do want to return energy at a much more rapid rate, you can of course plug it in, and here you've got a CCS and Type 2 port. The latter is present on both the driver and passenger sides, which makes it quite convenient to plug in at a public charge point. Speaking of which, here via the CCS port you can attain up to 150 kilowatts of input, which is a little bit lackluster in comparison to the likes of Tesla, but nonetheless will take you from 5 to 80% in just a mere 30 minutes. These chargers can be a little bit hard to find, and of course you might have the ability to plug it in at home or at a workplace. Now, if you have access to a 3-phase power supply, in other words an 11 kilowatt charger, it will go from 0 to 100% in roughly 9 to 9.5 hours. Opt for a 7 kilowatt wall box, which is far more common and less complicated to install. Of course, if you're installing it for the first time, it will take you roughly 14 hours to attain a full charge. A 3-pin socket will of course take you a lot longer at roughly 35 hours, but we expect most people over here to actually have a wall box given that the price of the e-tron S actually offers. Now, it's worth considering that you can upgrade the 11 kilowatt onboard charger to a 22 kilowatt one, and therefore it will shave down that time when you're plugged in at home. So moving swiftly on, we get onto its interior design, and here we suspect a lot of you will agree with us to say that its interior is absolutely stunning. From the choice of materials around the dashboards or the door frames, or the stitching work around the upholstery or the steering wheel, everything is absolutely beautiful, and here it's no surprise because it is a premium Audi vehicle after all. Now, when it comes to a technology standpoint of view, you've got a 10.1 inch display that's planted towards the center of the dashboard, although we really do like the fact that it supports haptic feedback, and also the fact that it's also slightly angled towards the driver, making it a little bit more usable when you're on the move, or indeed if you want to see key information. Speaking of which, here it does support Android Auto and Apple CarPlay both in a wired and wireless format, which is certainly appreciated over previous Audi iterations. Now, below it you do have a secondary display, and this is pretty much dedicated for your climate controls. While we would have preferred physical buttons and knobs, it is still a really nice vivid screen, and one that also still has haptic feedback, and therefore gives you the sensation of pressing something rather than just touching something. Now, moving on towards our driver display, we've got an elongated 12-inch fully digitalized instrument cluster. It provides all the key information and can be customized to a certain degree, although it's slightly a shame that it doesn't feed Android Auto or Apple CarPlay navigation data, and indeed only relies on the navigation data that is built in. As for the head-up display, this is actually not available as an option, at least not in the e-tron S, which was previously on the regular e-tron. Instead, if you do want a head-up display, you're going to have to splash out on the Vosprong version, which does include it as standard, and of course it can't be added in as an option. Speaking of your options, you do have the ability to upgrade the audio system, because as standard in the e-tron S you have got a 10-speaker 180 watt configuration. If however you opt for the e-tron S Vosprong or the regular e-tron S and add the comfort and sound pack at roughly £1,900, this will add a few additional goodies, and also of course the Bang & Olufsen system, which outputs a staggering 705 watts of total power and 16 speakers. Now, what we'll say in a nutshell here is that the B&O B&O system does provide a hearty upgrade over the stock system, although might leave certain audiophiles a little bit disappointed. If you want some more information about it, do check it up on your pop banner, down description below, or indeed in the pinned comments, as we do dedicated audio reviews of every vehicle that we get in. Now, for you to connect up to the infotainment system and indeed for you to play back your favorite tracks via your smartphone, you have got a Bluetooth connection, or better still, a wireless Android Auto or Apple CarPlay connection, and of course you have got that fabled wired connection which will give you the superior audio fidelity. Here there's two Type-C ports found within the center armrest compartment. The further two Type-C ports found towards the rear of the center console are only used for charging. Now, this does perfectly lead us onto comfort within the cabin, namely at the rear. And here is someone who's just under 6 foot. I've got no issues when it comes to legroom or indeed headroom. I'd go as far as saying that if someone's 6'4", 6'7", they won't feel hemmed in. Better still, Audi have integrated a near flat footwell design, and as a result means that if you've got a fifth occupant, they won't be left uncomfortable. On the flip side, however, the seats are diagonally wedged, and as a result means your pelvis sits a little bit lower than your knees, and on longer excursions it might be uncomfortable for all 3 occupants. The same couldn't be said, however, at the front of the cabin, whereby the seats are electronically adjustable and heated as standard and are very accommodating. We've got no issues whatsoever in this department, and we suspect most people will be left very much comfortable on longer journeys. Now, elsewhere, we should point out that our Tesla model came with the 4-zone climate controls and therefore gives the rear occupants the ability to independently adjust the climate from the front of the cabin. This costs £825. On the subject of your options, it's actually quite surprising not to see a fixed panoramic glass roof nor the soft door close on the regular e-tron S. And indeed, if you do want these, you'll have to splash out a significant extra amount of cash on the Vossprung version. Now, no matter which trim level you go for, you'll actually be quite surprised that at the rear of the cabin, if you were to drop down the windows, well, they stop to around a third, and therefore means that if you've got children that are sat at the back, they won't be able to fully appreciate the scenery or the place that you're driving. Furthermore, given the fact that the rear privacy glass is fitted as standard, it means that it's tinted and further dampens the experience for your rear occupants. Now, no matter if you go for the regular e-tron S or the Vossprung version, you'll get an electric tailgate that comes fitted as standard. It can be operated from within the cabin via your remote fob or via a button found just above the number plate. Now, when it does open up, it's got that hatchback design, and furthermore, I'm just under 6 foot, and you can see I've got absolutely no problems when it comes to headroom, so therefore you might be even pushing 7 foot and you won't have a problem loading in and out goods, which is certainly appreciated. Now, when it comes to total capacity, despite the e-tron S having an extra motor over the regular e-tron, it still boasts 660 litres of capacity, and this extends up to 1,725 litres when the seats are propped down. That is absolutely class leading and one of the key selling points of the regular e-tron and of course the e-tron S in comparison to some of rival offerings. Now, better still, you've got a 40-20-40 split folding rear seat, which can also be actuated via a lever found towards the rear of the boot, and therefore makes it a little bit more handy when you're loading in and out goods. The retractable boot cover can be removed, and then you've got side compartments as well for additional storage. And just to add the cherry on the top, you then have got an underfloor compartment, which can be handy for transporting, let's say, a spare tire or even your charging cables. Now, there is an additional 60 litres of capacity at the front of the vehicle, which should suffice for taking your charging cables or indeed smaller grocery shops. Although it should be mentioned that it's not as easily accessible as the tailgate, because it's only manually propped open and closed, and therefore it doesn't have any sort of electronic controls. Now, it's similarly excellent within the cabin, whereby you've got 4 large-sized door bins and an equally practical glove compartment. And then towards the center console area, you have got 2 cup holders, which can be concealed if you do not want them via retractable cover. And then you have got a little area beside it for your smartphone or, for example, your wireless key fob. Here you'll also find a 12-volt socket, which can be handy for a dash cam. And as for the area found underneath the center armrest, it is relatively small, although we quite like the fact that Audi have included a small little hole allowing you to feed through a USB cable, such as when you are charging a smartphone. Speaking of the manufacturer's clever design, this brings us onto its exterior look, and subjectively we think it is absolutely stunning. From the front, you've got these very stylish headlights, and they're treated with a relatively large size grille, but it's quite fitting with the rest of the vehicle's frame. As for the rear, you have got these futuristic tail lights which stretch the width of the vehicle, and then you've got an integrated spoiler to add to the overall sporty flair of it. Speaking of which, towards the side, you've got 21-inch alloys that come fitted as standard, and then in the Vossprung version, you move over 22-inch rims. Now, it should be mentioned that the pictured colour is Catalunya red, which looks pretty spicy in our opinion, but if you're not a fan of this, you can go for the solid white or black, which come fitted as standard, and if you prefer another metallic or pearl colour finish, it'll come in at £750. Now, what isn't as impressive, however, are the standard driver assistance systems, because here Audi provides only basic cruise control with speed limiter and lane departure warning, which by the way has to be disabled each time you step inside the cabin via a button found on the stalk, which just does seem a little bit cumbersome. If you want to upgrade the experience and you want adaptive cruise control, camera-based traffic sign recognition, and also blind spot monitoring alongside a few extra features, you'll have to spend around £2,000 on the Tour Pack, which does seem a little bit crazy given the fact of the starting price of the Audi e-tron S is over £80,000. Now, elsewhere, you do have the ability to add Audi Pre-Sense rear and side assist at £625. Suffice to say, there are quite a few options for you to choose. Now, when it comes to visibility, I've got no issues at the front, rear, or indeed at the side. It's very easy to peer around your corners and also to check for, let's say, oncoming cyclist or motorist. Now, it should be mentioned here that when it comes to parking, you do have 360-degree sensors, in other words, front, rear, and side, and therefore takes the stress away from, let's say, curbing your rims. However, if you want to upgrade the experience, you might want to go for the 360-degree cameras, and these come in comprised within the Comfort and Sound Pack, which comes in at just roughly £1,900. If you do not want to opt for that, by the way, you do have a rear view camera that comes fitted as standard, as you might expect given the vehicle's price, and therefore takes the stress away when it comes to doing a complex parking maneuver. So with all of that in mind, it brings us on to our verdict, and frankly the Audi e-tron S lives up to the billing. Its tri-motor configuration is absolutely ridiculous. You have a very comfortable driving experience thanks to its adaptive air suspension, which comes fitted as standard, and you then have a very premium exterior and interior design, and further one that's quite practical, both in terms of rear occupant space and boot capacity. The biggest flaw, however, is its electric range. In comparison to the likes of the Tesla Model X or, for example, Volvo's offerings, it's just not as impressive. Nonetheless, if you are looking for a premium EV and you don't mind its relatively short range, then the e-tron S might actually be the perfect vehicle for you. As a result, we do have to give it our performance award. Now, I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts of the vehicle down in the comments section below, and if you've liked this independent detail review and want to see more from the channel and myself, definitely do drop a like, subscribe and hit that bell notification, all of which are greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.